Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 26 mini-series with the Los Angeles Angels. And we just concluded the 2026 season, kind of a good news, bad news type of situation. The good news is that we won 16 more games than we did a year ago. And with a .494 winning percentage, we had the best season that the Angels have had since 2018. The bad news is we still had a losing record at 80 and 82, just missed out on being above 500. So our owner Artie Moreno's goal for us to play 500 ball, we did just miss at. Likely to lose a little bit of money this year. We'll see whether that results in a larger or a smaller budget for us next year. Did make a lot of progress in attendance, up by about nearly 1.3 million extra people in the seats this year in Anaheim, so that's certainly positive. So definitely made some progress this year. Was it as much as we had hoped when we were competing for both the division title and a wild card spot at the beginning of August? Not exactly, but I have to take into account that this is a step-by-step process. We improved by 16 games from last year, and hopefully we'll make some improvements next year and not only be above 500 in 2027, but also put ourselves hopefully into contention for a potential playoff spot. And take a quick look at the standings here. The Dodgers, the best team in baseball with 108 wins, won the National League West by 34 games. They were the dominant team in the National League. St. Louis with 92 wins and the Phillies with 89 were the second and third best teams in the league. A little more balanced in the AL. The Baltimore Orioles, a 101 win team, the best in the American League. The 96 win Minnesota Twins edged out the 94 win Seattle Mariners in our division for the second first round bye. The Mariners, after we and some others made some trades with them approaching the trade deadline, certainly went in the right direction. They ended up beating the Rangers by 8 games and us by 14 games in the AL West. So thought I had put together a good trade with the Mariners that was going to help us close the gap on them, but apparently they may have known a little more than I did. And before we get the playoffs underway, we will check in on some of our former players who we traded away in the first year of this playthrough. Yusei Kikuchi, the pitcher, we kept a very small amount of his salary for this year and potentially next year if he opts in when we dealt him to the Reds. All in all, I think it was pretty good to get that contract off the books. He was 7-13 with a 5.38 ERA for the Reds this year and led the National League with 32 home runs allowed. So I think it was good that we got rid of him right before the trade deadline a year ago. Anthony Rendon, this was the final year of his contract. Unfortunately, we had to retain 70% of it to get him off the books to Kansas City, but he is now 36 years old, wrecked physically, and after missing all of last year, had just 95 at-bats for the Royals this year, hit .232 with 1 homer in 10 ribbies, 68 WRC plus, and he was below replacement level player. He will be heading to free agency next year. Can't imagine that he's going to be getting anywhere near $38 million on the open market. It's also conceivable that it's the end of the road for Mr. Rendon. And the big trade that we made last year, or the biggest of the three, was certainly moving on from Mike Trout. Traded him to the Baltimore Orioles, and we got Adley Rutschman back in return, got that big Trout contract and his mid to late 30s with his fragile physique off of our books. He ended up playing in 122 games for Baltimore this year, 19 homers and 55 ribbies with a .235 average. Also stole 19 bases. ultimately was slightly above average offensive player with a 104 WRC plus and a 2.6 WAR. So a respectable season for Mr. Trout, but certainly not the type of numbers that he was putting up in his prime. And taking a look at the playoff tree, as we noted, the Orioles and the Twins, the top two seeds in the American League. Tigers will face off against the Red Sox, and the Rays against the AL West winning Seattle Mariners. Over in the National League, the Dodgers and Cardinals are the 1 and 2 seeds respectively. The Pirates and the Reds in a wild card series, and then the Braves and the Phillies in a wild card series as well. So some divisional matchups in those first round series in the National League, and a old AL East divisional matchup from 40 years ago between the Tigers and the Red Sox in an AL wild card series. And as we prepare for the League Championship Series, a lot of upsets to report. The only team with a first-round bye that made it through was the Baltimore Orioles and our former star Mike Trout. They took out the Red Sox 3-0 after the Red Sox beat the Tigers in the wild card series. Seattle is looking pretty good. They took out the Rays 2 games in a row and then took out the Twins 3-1. So Baltimore will be facing off against our divisional rival Mariners in the ALCS. Over in the National League, Cincinnati took out the Pirates, and then they beat the mighty Dodgers, the best team in baseball. So they'll have one spot in the NLCS. Philadelphia took out their division rival Braves, who happened to be the defending World Series champions. Then they took out the second-seeded Cardinals. So a couple of wild card teams, the Reds and the Phillies, facing off in the National League Championship Series. And as the playoffs move along, the International Free Agent Showcase just took place, so we're deciding which 10 players we're going to bring into camp initially. One that we know very well, closer Omar Cristola. We've got very high scouting accuracy on him. Probably not a guy that we're ultimately going to pursue because he does look like he's more of a future reliever. But kind of interesting that for whatever reason, our scout Cody McAllister knows a lot about Cristola. Another reliever, Victor Pa, looks like he could be absolutely incredible with stuff and movement off the charts, although his control is not optimal and he's fragile as far as his injury proneness. I could definitely see us moving on from Cristola and Pa after this first engagement. Couple of very interesting starting pitchers, though. Ruben Burns, known as Nasty, and you can see why. We think he's going to have a fastball that tops out over 100 miles an hour, and his stuff, movement, and control could all be well above average. Potentially brilliant 5-pitch arsenal for the right-handed pitcher. And he might not even be the best one because Hanno Batz from Germany, the Vulture, looks like he could be an absolute monster as well. Another guy who we think can hit triple digits. His stuff, his movement, and control could all be exceptional, and we think his fastball, his curve, and changeup could all be great. Mix in a outstanding splitter. Although these guys are young and a long way away, it's going to be tough to talk me off one of these world-class starting pitching prospects. That being said, there's a lot of interesting position players as well. Third baseman Tony Lopez looks like an absolute monster offensively. Center fielder Jorge Mancera, also known as the Murph, looks incredible as well. Off-the-chart speed and contact, gap power, and a batting eye that all could be borderline incredible with durability and decent home run power. Center fielder Vinny Morales going to strike out a bit more, struggle making contact, but his home run power and his eye could both be world-class, along with really good speed. Shortstop Alfredo Perez looks like a pretty well-balanced bat. Not a ton of gap power, but think he could excel everywhere else. And he's already a very well-developed infielder. Jordan Garcia, a center fielder, really good contact and gap power. The home run power in the eye not as great, but a solid looking outfielder with decent speed. And then last but not least, third baseman Pedro Perez, very well balanced bat, a nice arm. I think that there are some potentially incredible players in this class. My favorites, probably the pitchers, the starters, Hano Batz and Ruben Burns. And then the third baseman, Tony Lopez, the center fielder, Jorge Mancera. Both look absolutely incredible to me. The shortstop, Alfredo Perez, is probably on my short list as well. A little more sour on Vinny Morales just because of the strikeouts and struggles to make contact. But as we get to know these players better, we'll get to know their personalities, and that may help make some decisions for me a little easier, because right now it's like a kid in the candy store with some of these prospects. I'm guessing some of them, the personalities will be bad. Some of them, they'll kind of be meh. But hopefully if one or two of those big guys has a incredible personality, we'll know exactly who we're going to be targeting in the IAFA period in about 3 months. If you've got any initial thoughts, would love to hear them in the comments section. And it's possible we're 4 games away from Mike Trout finally getting his World Series championship, which was kind of a goal of ours in the back of our minds as we started off this series. We just kind of thought it might be with our Los Angeles Angels rather than with the Baltimore Orioles, but the Orioles are steamrolling through the playoffs, a 7-0 record after sweeping both the Red Sox and the Mariners. And they'll be facing off against the Phillies in the World Series. So on paper, you'd have to think that the Orioles with 101 wins are going to be favored over the 89-win Philadelphia Phillies as they try to win a World Series here in 2026. But unfortunately for Mike Trout and the Orioles, their magic ran out in the World Series. The Phillies beat them in 7 games, 4-3. I believe that's a rematch of the 1983 World Series, if I remember correctly, which I believe Baltimore won, the one championship that Cal Ripken Jr. did have over the course of his career. Check in on that last game and just see... looks like Trout had a couple of homers in the World Series. Take a look at what he did in the postseason this year. His first, actually it wasn't his first postseason action in over a decade, because he did play in the postseason last year with Baltimore. Hit just a .148 with 1 homer in 7 games a year ago. He was in the lineup for all 14 games for them this year. 3 homers, 4 ribbies, a .259 average, and a 122 WRC plus for Mr. Trout. So he definitely came through in the postseason this time around after being not so good his first couple trips in October. And with the World Series now wrapped up, time to get thinking about the off season. So before we get into the off season in our next episode, we're going to do our annual roster review today. Need a option year decision on Jason Adam, who had a pretty solid year for us as a reliever. Tend to think we can bring him back for $1.5 million. We probably will. Going to need to think about what to do in development facilities. Arbitration is also underway, and we've got a big list of arbitration eligible players, once again highlighted by Adley Rutschman, who's looking to make $15-16 million. Top prospects list, and we've got a guy on the list, Andres Rodriguez, who we drafted 6th overall this past year, listed as the number 4 prospect in baseball, actually one ahead of Ethan Holiday, who we were hoping would fall to us with the number 2 overall pick a year ago, but of course he went 1st overall to the Nationals. Ivan Ramos, who was picked first this year by the Tigers, is the number 2 prospect in all of baseball. But pretty happy to have the 4th-ranked prospect overall, and Rodriguez really did a good job for us in the minors this year. Hit 253 in 83 at-bats in A-ball, but put up a 128 WRC plus before we promoted him to high A, and he was only in high A for a week. Hit 296, 3 homers, and 10 ribbies, and we moved him right up to double A. Double A was definitely a little more of a challenge for him, but when all was said and done, he hit 290 with a 109 WRC plus. So his ratings don't look all that different than they did when we drafted him. Likely we'll be using one of the development spots on him this offseason in an effort to jumpstart his development and hopefully put him in a situation whereby this time of year from now he's got a little bit of major league experience as a September call-up. Oh, and this is kind of sad but funny. The only hitting coach that, or the only coach that we had on the team last year that we didn't fire out of our minor league system, Ray Willie Gomez, decided to let him go, so we'll have a complete turnover. We also have a player retiring. I'm trying to think who that could possibly be, because I don't think we've got any real old players. Could be Robbie Ray after that latest injury. Could also be one of the veteran middle infielders that we had signed to a minor league contract, if I had to guess. Yeah, Robbie Ray. That makes sense. Suffered a major injury that ended his season with us, and career for the former Cy Young Award winner is over at the age of 35. That was, if I could go to his injury history, surgery to remove bone chips that ended his season. Didn't end up pitching in the majors after April of this year with that injury, and then the other injury that happened on his rehab assignment. And Robbie Ray's career is over at the age of 35. Now the big information, the review of season goals and checking in on our budget. He wanted us to have a 500 record this year and seems pretty upset that we were a game away from that. Is happy to have Andres Rodriguez on board and the work that we've done with the farm system. Fan interest is improving. Still trying to find some international amateurs. Doesn't feel too confident in our goal of making the playoffs in a few seasons. Overall, happy with our performance in goals, happy with our performance in on-field and front office management. Wants us to play close to 500 ball, sign Joe Jimenez, increase attendance significantly, keep increasing fan interest, more international amateur free agent fines, and make the playoffs in the next 4 years. So pretty high expectations and high goals from Mr. Moreno, which we're going to do our best to try to achieve. Wonder if we're going to have more than the $242 million we had this year to try to achieve those goals. And that's a nice bump, $266 million. So I do feel good about that. That should put us in a situation front office wise where we don't have a ton of money to spend right now, but we will be clearing some salaries off the books. Have some arbitration eligible players, most notably, and this is a bug in the game that I just noticed offline. Randy Arozarena, who we picked up in that trade with Seattle, that I thought was going to help propel us to a division title, but really just helped propel them to a division title. Says he's only got 1 year and 171 days of major league service time. But as anyone who's followed baseball over the last close to a decade knows, he's been a regular major leaguer for many years at this point. But for some reason, with the service time that he has, it says that he's an arbitration eligible player to make $11.3 million. We're not going to spend that to bring him back. We're obviously going to move on from him, so that will certainly free up some money for us. And yeah, it definitely seems like there is something off with the finances right now. I'm sure this is a bug that they're probably aware of and working on fixing, or perhaps already has been fixed. but it says our projected player payroll is almost 204 million for next year. But when we go to the salary page, it's 177 million. That, I believe, would typically be the number that would flow through here to player payroll. So I am a little confused about exactly what's going on at this point. But hopefully the file is not corrupted overall, and we can kind of figure this out. But I thought we were going to have some money to play with when I looked at this front office screen after that nice bump in the budget, and when I saw just $1 million available, I was a bit confused. But it's because for some reason they're using a real bad number for us for potential player expenses next year, and I'm not sure where they got that from. So assuming I can get the financial stuff figured out, and we'll have the money that we think we're going to have to spend this off season, start planning for what it might look like. Michael King will definitely be back with us. We signed him to that 2-year deal a year ago. Disappointing first year in LA, 7-9 with an ERA of close to 5, barely above replacement level. Had some injury issues with a finger blister. Reed Detmers, a year after being an all-star with a 10-8 record and an ERA in the low 3s, was 8-10 with an ERA in the low 4s this year. His WAR pretty similar between the two seasons, however. Christian Scott, 10-8 with a 4.05 ERA. He's still set to make the major league minimum next year. Should be an important part of our rotation. Jose Soriano, only 6-12 this year, but his 3.2 WAR was the best on our team. And after the money we spent on Vlad Guerrero and Kyle Tucker in free agency last year, when I say Soriano's 3.2 WAR, unfortunately for us, isn't just the best among pitchers. It's the best among anyone on the team. So he'll likely back. And Mr. Contreras, 5-8 with a 3.75 ERA, had a much better second season in LA. Joe Jimenez, who ownership wants us to sign, did a good job as a reliever for us, ended up as our closer towards the end of the year. 11 wins, 17 saves, 38 shutdowns, struck out almost 12 batters per 9 innings, put up a WAR of close to 2. The issue is he's looking for 4 years at $16 million a pop for a reliever heading into their 30s, heading towards their mid-30s, actually. Not necessarily something I think we're going to want to do. Jason Adam, as I mentioned, we got $1.5 million option on him. He had a 3.06 ERA this past year. Probably will bring him back. Lefty Garrett McDaniels, 5-7 record with a 3.59 ERA. A lot of shutdowns, but a lot of meltdowns as well. I think that's a common trend that you're going to see in our bullpen, as it was problematic this year. Ben Joyce, who started the year as our closer, ended up as a setup man. 5-9 record, 17 saves, 5.24 ERA. His WAR this year was actually higher than a year ago, but I can't say that the results really made me very happy. Colin Snyder, right-handed pitcher who we claimed on waivers from Seattle. He's going to be eligible for arbitration, set to make about $1.7 million. Had a respectable season as a middle reliever with a win above replacement overall. Likely we'll have Snyder back next year. Robert Bob Stevenson came off of the IL to pitch in 11 games for us. Had a brutal 12.19 ERA with 4 home runs, including 4 home runs among 22 hits allowed in just 10 1/3 innings. So he was absolutely brutal. His ratings make it look like he could still be a pretty useful bullpen pitcher for us, and after making $11 million last year, looking for just $1.8 million next year, so it's conceivable he could be back. Lefty A.J. Block, 3.61 ERA over 77 1/3 innings pitched. His FIP minus was actually not all that great, a little worse than average, and he was barely above replacement level. but he could be back with us next year. Chase Silseth may have pitched his final year in LA. He's set to start making more than the minimum next year. And although his record was 3-0 this year, the ERA was 5.64 over 60 and 2/3 innings pitched, about half a win below replacement. Second straight year with both his ERA plus and FIP minus well below average. Actually, third straight year at the major league level, although the sample size back in 2024 was small. Doesn't seem like Silseth is the answer to any questions we're asking. And Gabe Spire, the other guy that we picked up from Seattle, in addition to Arozarena, was not that good for us. A 5.66 ERA over 20 and 2/3 innings. Sierra and his WAR and his FIP minus all indicate that he probably pitched better than his numbers, but ultimately he allowed a lot of runs to be scored in the limited innings that he pitched for us this past season. Taking a look broadly at the team statistics, the pitching staff overall 9th in the league in runs allowed. Significant improvement from ranking 15th the year before, but you can see we were kind of the bottom half of the league in every pitching category except for strikeouts, where we happened to be second. Before we get into the position players, the offense was more middle of the pack, 7th in runs scored, and while the other pitching stats trended towards the bottom half of the league, most of our batting stats trended towards the top half of the league, middle of the pack in terms of stolen bases and our base running metrics. We were a poor fielding team this season, however. Turning to our position players, feel good about our catching situation. Logan O'Hoppe was our backup catcher this year, and you may ask, how did a backup catcher play 152 games? Well, he was our starting DH when he wasn't our backup catcher, led the team with 31 home runs, drove in 79. The batting average dipped all the way to 236. He was hitting over 300 in the early stages of the season, so he really got cold towards the end of the year. But he did end up a slightly above average offensive player, put up just a 1 WAR on the season despite those numbers. So like the pop in his bat, he's still going to be relatively inexpensive next year, but definitely needs some further development from O'Hoppe. Would love to see him putting up WARs of 2.8 like he did back in 2024. Clearly, there's a disadvantage to playing designated hitter, which goes into that number. He did play a competent-ish catcher for us in the 38 games that he started behind the plate when Adley Rutschman needed a rest. Rutschman, definitely a down year compared to the first half season he had with the Angels. He was basically a league average offensive player for us. Still put up a 3 WAR, 14 homers, 60 ribbies. Solid defensive catcher, not a superstar. We'll be bringing him back next year, but a salary is starting to certainly get high, and Rutschman doesn't look like the player that the Orioles hoped he might have been 3 or 4 years ago, which is probably part of the reason they were willing to trade him to us for Trout. Speaking of players who aren't what we thought they were, Vlad Guerrero Jr. did come on in the second half of the season, but the numbers are not what we were hoping for $37 million. Hit .250 on the year with 24 homers and 79 ribbies. But when all was said and done, he was not even a win above replacement level, and he was only a slightly above average offensive player. So not nearly what we were hoping to get from Vlad Guerrero Jr. Certainly hope that the fact that he did play much better in the second half of the year works in his favor. You can see hit .260 with 6 homers in August, and then .283 with 5 homers in September. Those were by far the best 2 months of the season he had. Actually, his May was pretty good as well. .287 with 5 homers in May, but the highest WARs he put up were in August and September, which was interestingly when we were kind of falling out of contention. His bat finally started to heat up a little bit, but certainly need a lot more from him next year. Jazz Chisholm rented him from the Yankees, hit just 218, did have 7 homers and 26 ribbies, was barely above replacement level, and he is looking for $19 million a year. I don't know that we can bring him back at that number. Brooks Lee, 214 average and 238 at-bats, started 66 games for us this year, but a 58 WRC plus, barely above replacement level. I think our goal is to get Brooks Lee into even more of a pure utility role next year, where he's starting more like 30 or 40 games for us rather than 60 or 70. How we're going to get there, not really sure. Dylan Moore hit 243 and 169 at-bats for us. He was a minor league free agent signing, ended up spending a good chunk of the year with us in the majors, but at 34 years old, probably will be moving on from him, especially given that he's looking for about $7 million a year next season. Similar story for Brendan Rodgers, another minor league free agent signing who ended up having a fairly prominent utility infielder role for us this year. Ended up hitting just 206 with a 40 WRC plus, was well below replacement level. And he's still looking for $5 million a year for 3 years. Just don't see us bringing back a lot of these infielders. One who will be back next year, Addison Barger, had a really nice year for us, was named to the All-Star team, hit 255, 15 homers, 53 ribbies, overall put up a 105 WRC plus and a 2.4 WAR for us. He's stabilized that third base position a bit for us. Not a superstar, but a competent major leaguer, which is a lot better than what we've had at some of our infield spots over the year. Last but not least among the infielders, Zach Neto, 266 average, hit 18 homers, stole 29 bases, all set a 109 WRC plus and a 2.9 WAR. So another pretty solid season from him. In a perfect world, we'd love to pivot Neto over to second base if we can find a big-time defensive shortstop with a bat, but there's not too many big-time defensive shortstops with bats around, and the free agent market is not looking particularly robust this year, so not exactly sure how we'll end up improving the infield this offseason, but it is certainly a spot that needs a lot of attention because we'll have Guerrero back at first, Neto back at short, Barger back at third, but the goal is to move Brooks Lee into utility role. And that means we've got to find someone else who can start for us somewhere. We certainly could pivot between second, third, and short among Barger and Neto. So we've got the opportunity to look just about anywhere for a solution. But a slick fielding infielder who can also hit would be a great addition for us to try to pursue this offseason. Turning to our outfielders, also going to have some work to do here. Arozarena will not be back with us. He was productive while we had him, hit almost 300 with a 143 WRC plus. He was starting only against left-handers regularly, but was a nice addition to the team. Unfortunately, we didn't play well enough to take advantage of him and get into the playoffs. And as I noted, actually, this is really weird because it does say here that he's not eligible for arbitration, which he really shouldn't be. He really should be a free agent, and I am just going to have to go into commissioner mode after this and just make him a free agent. But you can tell there's definitely something buggy going on because our player payroll is not $203 million next year. It's $177 million, and Randy Arozarena does not have 5 arbitration years ahead of him. I just don't know what's going on. Jock Peterson, another guy that we rented towards the end of the season. He was platooning and left with Arozarena. Arozarena playing against lefties. Peterson starting against righties. 271 average, 14 homers and 35 ribbies. Put up a 167 WRC plus for us and a WAR of close to 2. He is headed to free agency once again, looking for $18 million a year over 4 seasons. And I've been scolded on my pronunciation of Nolan. And honestly, I did look at some videos before I started doing this. I've been calling him Shawnal because I saw that on some videos from throughout his career. The phonetic pronunciation I got, I just watched another video, and I'm not sure if the phonetic pronunciation that someone brought up in a recent episode is actually correct or not. And since I started talking about it, I don't even remember the correct pronunciation. So I do like when we move forward in these games and it's all fictional players. So I'm just going to call him Nolan for the time being because I saw a video a week ago when this series started with one pronunciation. I just watched another video with a second pronunciation from the Angels organization, and the phonetic pronunciation that someone gave me didn't match up with either of those, although I'm assuming if someone took the time to write about it, they're probably technically correct. But for the foreseeable future, we'll just talk about Nolan. And Nolan, for what it's worth, had a solid year, a 116 WRC plus for us. We did send him down to AAA when we made those trades for the other left fielders. He is kind of a man without a position now with Guerrero at first base and then O'Hoppe regularly playing at designated hitter. But would love to find a spot in the lineup for him and certainly hope that he can tap that little extra bit of gap power and home run power that we think he has. He's set to make about $2.5 million next year. We'll certainly intend to bring him back. I think Alec Burleson was a reserve outfielder for us throughout the year, hit 240 and 154 at-bats, did have 9 homers and 26 ribbies, so he's pretty much a league average player, slightly below replacement level in terms of the overall package. Jo Adell, he's going to be a tough one for us to bring back next year, set to be making about $6 million in arbitration. And he definitely regressed this year, hitting just 208, 18 homers, 61 driven in, was 9 for 9 stealing bases, but it all added up to a 75 WRC plus and a 0.6 WAR. Last, but certainly not least, is our center fielder and the other big free agent signing from last season, along with Vlad Guerrero Jr. That's, of course, Kyle Tucker. Ended up hitting 256 for us, 29 doubles, 28 homers, scored 78 runs, drove in 82, stole 13 bases for us, added up to a 120 WRC plus, but his WAR was only 2.5 on the season. And unfortunately, he just was not great in center field. Zone rating and defensive efficiency both well below average. On paper, with that 65 range and error rating, it seems like he should be competent in center field, but we definitely saw him be decidedly below average this past year. So in a perfect world, we'd love to be able to pivot him to right field or left field next year, where his glove would be a big asset. Unfortunately, however, Rodriguez isn't going to be ready to take over center field likely at the beginning of next year. Would love to have him up by the end of the season, but for the time being, Andres Rodriguez has some more minor league seasoning that he ultimately needs. But we have made huge progress in the minor league system over the 2 years we've been here, 2 drafts and 1 IAFA period, now ranked 4th overall, and that's really driven by this year's first-round pick Andres Rodriguez, Tony Godinez, who we picked in the IAFA pool, or signed, more accurately, out of the IAFA pool this past year, spent the entire year at our international complex, would expect that he'll be in the DSL next year. Last year's first-round pick, Sean Gamble, played in rookie ball and did well this year, and really struggled when we first sent him up to A-ball at a 20-year-old, but ended up doing fine. 252 average, 110 WRC plus. So Gamble continues to progress, and he's the number 31 prospect in baseball. So We've acquired, with our 2 first-round picks and the prime guy that we focused on in IAFA this year, 3 of the top 31 prospects in baseball over the last 14 or 15 months. The only other top 200 prospect we have, Joshua Lugo. He was a guy that we inherited in the organization, started the year in rookie ball. We also promoted him to A ball, where he held his own, although he wasn't particularly impressive. So some good minor leaguers, and certainly when you think about Andres Rodriguez, hopefully some of them will be able to help us in the not too distant future. And with that, we will call it an episode. We are on to the beginning of the off season. Next time around, we possibly may have simmed ahead a day or two from here if there's something interesting that we discover in the trade market. I guess before I finish, I did allude to the fact that I don't think it's going to be all that impressive a free agent class. Might as well share that information with the worldwide scouting department. You can see Joe Jimenez, our reliever, and then Chris Sale are the highest rated overall and potential players going to be on the market. A few other starters to potentially think about: Sandy Alcantara, Brandon Woodruff coming off of another injury, ulnar nerve entrapment, going to impact him for another 1 to 2 weeks. I guess the positive thing is we can probably get a scouting report before free agency begins to think better about whether we might want to bring him on board. Blake Trinan and Keegan Egan, maybe guys that we'd go after as relievers. Brian Abreu, I guess you could say the same thing, but doesn't look like we're going to likely be able to find our ace unless we want to spend upwards of $40 million a year on the selfish and fragile 37-year-old Chris Sale, which I don't think we'll do. Woodruff could be a decent compromise candidate, but again, he's coming off of an injury that ended his season early, and because of that, he wasn't able to pitch in the playoffs for the world champion Philadelphia Phillies. Batter-wise, again, I feel, when I look at this pool, glad that we went a little bit aggressive last year with going after both Tucker and Vlad Guerrero Jr. because there's certainly some interesting players out there. I guess Luis Robert Jr. Would be a potential upgrade defensively in center field. Just not sure what kind of bat he is at this point. It's been a long time at the major league level. Going back to 2023 at this point for when he put up an above-average offensive season, according to WRC+. Looking for pretty big money as well, so would be the center fielder that we're looking for. I just don't know if he's really a $20 million player at this point, so we may have to get a little more creative in the trade market. I guess the only positive thing is that we do have some higher quality assets in our minor league system now that could help us perhaps get a trade done. So if you've got thoughts on the postseason, would love to hear them. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.